All right. Thank you all for coming and joining us again for another one of our Camera West webinars. Hope you are all doing well and are safe. We wish that we could be with you and show you these incredible products in person as we usually prefer to do, but this brings a unique opportunity for all of us to learn something a little bit new. Today we have all the guys over at Hasselblad, and Dan will be speaking on the X series cameras. If you have any questions at all during his presentation, we invite you to leave them in the Q&A section as well as the chat section, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions beyond that, you always can email us and reach out to us directly. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to Dan.
Awesome, thanks. I appreciate the intro. Just to tell you a little bit about what we have in store today. First, who I am. I'm Dan. I work on the marketing team here with Hasselblad over on the East Coast. And I'm joined by Ryan Unger, who is our local representative over on the West Coast, and we'll be hearing from him towards the end of the session. Before we put too many things ahead of us, wanted to start with what we have on deck or what we have on plan, and really focusing on the X1D2 and a lot of the X system lenses and how these can really expand your capabilities creatively. So we'll be starting with a little bit of history and looking at what got us here and the product's lineup as we know it today. And then we'll dive into some of the unique features of the Hasselblad system overall, and then specifically the X1D2. Towards the end, we'll be really focusing on some of the technical aspects and features, looking into color science, optical science, and how these translate into tangible factors that can really elevate your creative work as a photographer. So starting with the history, it's really hard to describe Hasselblad without looking at the full 79, well, next year, 80 years of our history as a manufacturer. And it begins in 1941 with our first camera, the HK7. And it was a aerial camera commissioned by the Swedish military during World War II, with the Hasselblad family being tightly involved in photography for the 100 years before that. They went to Victor Hasselblad with the need for a more accurate, more high functioning aerial camera. Now, in the post-war era, we would actually recognize, or he would recognize, the need for a consumer camera that would address the primary features of image quality and portability. So starting in 1948, in the same decade, we would introduce the 1600F, and it really set forward a silhouette that becomes very familiar with the Hasselblad name, and then gets updated in the next decade with the 500C, one of our most popular cameras. And from the 500 series, it would really cement Hasselblad with a name in professional photography. And as we moved forward into the 20th and 21st centuries, we would continue developing imaging solutions that would really evolve the photographic tool set for photographers. 2016 is a major leap year for us in terms of our product lineup, and it was the introduction of the X1D, the first mirrorless medium format digital camera as a fully integrated unit. And X1D, in what it was designed to do, it's actually not far off from where we started our business, which is portable image quality. So combining the major features of medium format image technology and putting it into a very compact package that was designed to be brought out into the world and take photography even further. Since then, we've gone ahead and evolved what we can do with mirrorless medium format with two X system cameras, the X1D2 and the 907X. Now today we'll be speaking mostly to the X1D2, but the good news is a lot of the features that we've put into this camera also carry over to 907X. But if you have questions along the way, again, definitely drop them in the chat. So when we look at X1D2 and what this system represents, it's three primary areas that are core to our brand: image quality, precision mechanics, and design excellence. And in each of these areas, we've developed some really stunning technologies that can really elevate what you do with photography. First, with image quality. Let's start at the core, what's at the heart of X1D, and it's this image sensor. So like all the other Hasselblads produced today, X1D2 is a medium format camera. And we're often describing medium format in terms of comparison to what we see as full frame. Full frame being 24 by 36, based on the 35mm frame. X1D2 features a 50 megapixel sensor that measures 33 by 44 millimeters. So right off the bat, we're seeing about a 60% larger image area or a larger sensor. Naturally, this lends us a larger field of view when it comes to lenses in comparison. So it's important to think about a reverse crop factor when we get to the X system lenses. Now, inherently, from that larger image area at 50 megapixels, we're also producing a larger pixel. And what's really neat about the larger pixel is that it's more sensitive to light, meaning that a larger pixel on our medium format sensor is able to gather more light and reduce noise, namely that because it's more light sensitive, we're producing less digital noise in the conversion from light to digital data. So when we look at that description of light, we're going to look at it first in just values of brightness and then color. And in terms of values of brightness, we describe this as dynamic range. And all that is the darkest darks to the brightest brights in a single image, so shadows and highlights. And it's typically described in numbers of stops, which is in line with how we describe most of photography. And with most professional cameras, you can expect 10 to 12 stops. So from the darkest area of shadows where the darkest parts of the image are to the brightest areas in the highlights, you can expect up to 12 stops. Now, what's interesting about X1D2 is that our average from capture to capture is 14 stops. So in practical use, looking at an image like this, for example, when we try to encapsulate as much of the scene in one image as we can, we're able to capture more usable data across the frame. So a caveat in place with all of the sample images today, we're on the web, everything gets compressed down to as little data as possible. So you won't see all the fine nuances, but definitely check out the sample image gallery on our website where you can download high-res JPEGs and RAWs to really kind of pick things apart. But as an example here, in the subject's wardrobe, it's a shadow area, it's very dark wardrobe. And in most cases of a smaller dynamic range, you would expect this to get really blocked up. And what's really neat is in this example, in the full res, you can actually start to pick apart the detail in the fabric. And with the larger dynamic range in play, you can also discern usable data in the highlights too. So even if it's not immediately present in the image, you're still able to pull the data back in the RAW file. But because we have a native dynamic range that's larger than what you'd expect, you're not tying up time doing an HDR process or exposure bracketing. It really saves you a lot of time in post just by starting in the exposure process with a more advanced system. So we've described light. Let's move on to color quality, which is a pretty important part of the photographic process. Color is tricky though. Color is a very subjective process. And because it varies from viewer to viewer, I myself have a minor color blindness, and as I get older, I'll stop seeing color. So with every person, the interpretation of color is going to vary, but it always begins with a baseline perception. And the important thing for us is that we've been developing digital technologies since the late 1980s, meaning that over the last 30 years, we've really perfected what we believe is a blended solution that balances accurate color with something that's very pleasing to the eye. And the heart of that is really just something that we see as a very natural image that doesn't put too much color influence on the resulting photograph. So looking at this image, for example, we've processed it in a generic or standard sRGB profile, and it's considered what we would get color out of the box without much treatment. And when you look at it on its own, opinions being what they are, some people like the color present, some people don't. But a lot of camera manufacturers then go in and process the image even further, even if you're recording RAW. So what happens in camera is that a lookup table or a LUT is then applied to what comes off of the sensor. And with a lot of cameras, you can go in and change from portrait to landscape to natural to neutral color profiles. And even though it's a RAW processing, you're still doing some embedded color correction to the actual image. So throughout all of that, we aim to do something that did as little to the image as possible, and we call it HNCS, or the Hasselblad Natural Color Solution. Basically, it's a combination of a standardized LUT or calibration that occurs at the factory, along with decoding and image rendering in our software Focus. So those two partners combined allow us to produce an image that's very natural. It's not oversaturated, not over contrasted. So we're giving you, the photographer, as much latitude creatively as possible. meaning that we're not here to interpret what's good or bad color. We want to give you as much data as possible in all of our cameras. And we believe that HNCS is a really, really good solution in terms of delivering the highest quality image possible. So looking at image quality as a whole, we start with the size of the sensor. A larger pixel, which is more light receptive, which produces less noise and translates to a wider dynamic range. That wider dynamic range is then assisted by a very natural color solution that gives you, the photographer, as much data as possible for very neutral imaging. So next, let's move beyond image quality as we know it and go into what really goes into building a Hasselblad. And this is something that's both mechanical in the camera and the lenses itself. So X1D2, when we look at it, features sturdy metal construction. It's really meant to be durable and travel with you. And our idea was that we wanted to manufacture a camera that instills confidence. So when you pick up the X1D2, and I'm hoping that in a day soon, we'll all be able to gather together and show you the camera in person, but it's a camera that instills confidence when you pick it up. And I think there's a lot to be said about when you pick up a piece of hardware or a physical device, do you actually want to use it? Does it, not to overuse a phrase, but spark joy? And we spent a lot of time in terms of designing X1D2 to respond to what we believe is a higher degree of hardware design. Now that thought process also carries over in the manufacturing and the quality controls. Every camera is still manufactured, calibrated, and checked at our factory in Sweden, just as we have for nearly 80 years today. And again, when you pick up the camera, it's meant to inspire you to take the camera even further. And that carries over to our lenses. So all of the XCD lenses feature all metal construction inside and out, gaskets for weather resistance, and really give you the ability to trust the lens and camera that you're using. Inside the lenses, when we talk about the mechanics, it also includes the leaf shutter. Also described as a central shutter, it's a mechanism that's built into the lens, meaning that the capture process of opening and closing the shutter is all built into the lens. Now that gives us some great latitude in terms of making the camera design more compact, so we can really finesse the balance of the camera and how certain combinations of lens and camera fit into the hand and really balance well while you're shooting it. And likewise, it's an incredibly reliable system. So leaf shutters, all Hasselblad lenses produced today use a leaf shutter design, and they've been trusted in professional lenses for well over 100 years. The first lenses, or kind of the more modern lenses used in view cameras themselves, utilize a leaf shutter design. And to us, it's a very core aspect of mechanical design when we're looking at a camera system. Now, what people recognize most often with leaf shutter use is the exposure flexibility. So because the shutter mechanism opens and closes radially, we're actually able to sync with flash throughout the entire shutter speed range from 60 minutes to 1/2000th of a second. So using this image here on the right as an example, this is a typical flash exposure. So most focal plane cameras where the shutter is built into the camera body and it's built with a curtain design, you're limited to a certain number of shutter speeds where you can sync with flash. Typically, or industry standard is around 1/125th to 1/250th a second. And with this exposure here, we've simulated that. So lower ISO, deeper f-stop, typical X-sync shutter speed. And you can see that we're exposing for the foreground, but we're losing a bit of the background, especially in the sky. So with a leaf shutter, because we're able to sync all the way up to 2000th of a second, we're able to just crank the shutter speed, which only affects the ambient light. And that lets us bring back in the sky and the data and the clouds in the background while not having much effect on terms of the flash exposure. So what's really neat is that this technology is built into all of the XCD lenses. So from our widest at 21 millimeters to our telephoto options at 230 millimeters, they all carry forward the leaf shutter design, the focus by wire control, except for one lens, and really, really stunning durability with the all metal construction. So I do want to take a look at some of the standouts of the XCD lineup. Because it's our newest lens family, we've been able to do some pretty astounding things when it comes to optics. So starting at the widest, 21 millimeters. It's our widest lens ever, which is pretty astounding for almost 80 years in photography. It gives you about a 17 millimeter focal length if you're comparing it to full frame, and it's incredibly well corrected optically in terms of distortion, meaning that when you look at the curvature or the semblance of curvature in such a wide lens, you would expect a little bit of a fisheye look. But we've done a ton of work in terms of the optical design to make sure that the result is almost perfect. And then with each Hasselblad lens, we're providing lens profiles that brings it to a lab perfect result. We've really designed this lens to be an ideal partner for interiors, architectural work, especially if you're in a really, really tight space, but you still need to make the scene look very expansive. So 21, widest lens in the system, our widest lens ever. Really great option if you're working in interiors architecture. The next is our smallest lens. We announced it in February, and it's actually becoming one of my fast favorites because it's a portable lens. So 45p, it measures about what you'd expect from a 51.4 in full frame and gives you the field of view of 35. Again, larger sensor, reverse crop factor. We really designed this lens to be the perfect walk around street lens. It's nearly silent when you're actually shooting with it, and it becomes it just disappears with the camera, which is really fantastic. It's one of two 45mm lenses. Each has their own advantages, size versus portability, but it's a really astounding lens, and it's a natural go-to when you're picking up the X system. And last of three is one of my, I fall in love with this lens the more and more I use it. It's the 81.9. It's our fastest lens ever. Again, by working with a completely new optical system, we're able to produce some record-setting lenses for Hasselblad. So at f1.9, it's pretty astounding in what it can do, especially with that larger sensor. So what's really neat is that we've designed it to be a portrait lens, but because of the reverse crop factor, you actually see a little bit wider. So typically accepted on full frame for portrait or headshot work is like an 85mm, where this sees a little bit wider. That being said, the way the depth of field falls off, it still has that telephoto compression. So that separation of background to subject and the way that the out of focus areas just fall off and blur very beautifully is really, really astounding with the 81.9. So it gives you a bit of look overall on things. I'm seeing some folks in the chat have a debate about which lenses are rad. I see some love for the 65mm. I'm right there with you for our standard 50mm, and would love to hear, for existing X system users, what you love the most. So that's a look at our precision mechanics, and we'll wrap it up with design excellence. And it's important for us to consider design not just as a look or a graphic element to the camera. It is about the entire experience of using the camera. And when we talk about the experience of using the camera, it begins with how you control it. So on the back of the X1D2, you'll find a large 3.6-inch rear touchscreen. It's significantly larger than the first generation, along with a beautiful high-resolution OLED EVF. So these two elements where you're visually communicating with the camera are then complemented by touch navigation. So all of the aspects of the camera, so exposure control, menu navigation, setting parameters of the camera, those can all be done through the rear touchscreen. And it's a very intuitive way of working with things. So everything's a tap, a swipe. Basically, if you're relatively literate with a smartphone, the X1D2 is right there with you. We actually hear from the opposite side, people who are working full-time professionals and the cameras are generally very linear computer menu driven. The X1D2 comes to be really, really intuitive and really natural in how you move around the camera. Likewise though, if you don't like a touchscreen or you've got gloves on, you can still control all the aspects of the camera through the front and rear command dials and then the hard buttons to the right of the screen. So anything we do with touch can also be done through physical hardware too. It really complements different working styles in terms of the actual camera. So when we talk about the designed experience, there's a natural supplement to that. It's also post-production. And for us, that's our focused software processing environment. As it stands, it's both a desktop program and a mobile program. On desktop, we've really designed it to be the most powerful raw image processor that allows you to get as much data out of the imagery as possible. We do have compatibility for third-party programs, namely the Adobe Creative Cloud or Creative Suite, so Lightroom, Camera Raw, and Bridge, all open the Hasselblad 3FR RAW file natively. But if you're looking to get everything that you can out of the image possible, Focus is really the best partner. And we recognized a need in that when we set out to design the X system, we were really looking at portability. And the next natural step to that was portability in post-processing. So with the release of X1D2, We also put out Focus Mobile 2, which took the portability of a mobile device, specifically iPad Pro, and translated it to a professional tethering solution. So X1D2 is really unique in that you can tether directly to an iPad Pro, either via USB-C connection or through Wi-Fi. And with that, you can really start to achieve what you would expect out of a professional tethering program, but incredibly portable solution. So we'll actually do a deep dive into this next month when we have some pretty exciting developments and learning sessions for Focus, both on desktop and mobile. So definitely check out the events section of our website, hasselblad.com/events, to learn more and join us for those. So I'd like to actually just wrap things up with a summary. What's really neat is we start with image quality. We're starting with a camera that's been designed to bring the level of image quality that we expect out of medium format into a wider degree of portability. So we start with the bigger sensor, 60% larger than full frame at the get-go, with a larger pixel, right? That larger pixel lends us the wider dynamic range natively at 14 stops on average, and Hasselblad's natural color solution that lends you really, really neutral tones that are never oversaturated, never too contrasty. We then move on to precision mechanics, how we've built the camera and how we've built the lenses. So all metal construction, weather resistant design with gaskets of the battery and the lens everywhere you work with the camera. And then really stunning optical design. So lenses that really represent the best in class when it comes to modern medium format. So whether it's the widest lens at 21 millimeter, our fastest lens at 80 millimeters, they all carry forward that central shutter design that gives you professional level reliability and incredible consistency from each shot. Likewise, if you're working with flash outdoors where medium format really starts to excel, the leaf shutter design is a huge resource in terms of working with any mixed light sort of scenario. And we wrap it up with the designed experience. So when you interact with the camera, both physically by just picking it up and the menu system and how you move through the camera and navigate, it's incredibly intuitive. So when you pick up the camera, it's not a computer with a lens on it. It's really something that you're meant to interact with and really have a pleasant experience with. And then the image handling and post-production. So Focus being available on desktop, Mac, and PC, and tablet via the iPad Pro really is an amazing experience in terms of where you can go further with image quality, especially with the X1D2. So to wrap it up, let's actually jump it over to the Q&A section. We've had some really good questions in the chat come in already. One that I see so far, any chance for future tether support in Lightroom or Capture One? Yes and no. Lightroom, yes, we're working on an update to the tethered plugin. Capture One's a separate company, can't really speak to their camera support, but we do hear and field the request, and likewise, feature requests for the X or for our software are always well received. Let's see here. Will there ever be live view and focus for iPad? Yes, can confirm that we are working on that. We hope to bring it forward in an update. Let's see. Are the lenses glass or plastic? Actually, Ryan, I'd love to bounce it over to you if you want to field that one.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ryan Unger. I'm the West Coast sales and marketing specialist. Some of you guys know me, some of you guys don't, but nice to see you, or not see you. But yeah, the lenses are metal design with the leaf shutter inside, and they are great lenses.
Yeah, all glass elements. There's, I think, one toy lens that we've made historically in 80 years that had a plastic optic in it, but yeah, all glass lenses and all metal housing. Let's see, how would you describe the weather sealing? Well, Ryan, you've gone out and shot with it a fair bit. How's it been for you?
You know, I haven't had any trouble with the weather. I've shot at the beach, in the cliffs, in San Pedro, in Malibu. I've gone on hiking trails. I've shot all over. I love this camera. It feels great, ergonomically speaking. The software is, I feel, best in class. Weather seal wise, I haven't had any issues.
That's great. And then from Douglas, it sounds like he's curious about some of the differences between the first generation and X1D2.
Yeah, I can grab that one. So basically, there's been a lot of improvements. The X1D is a great camera and it shoots amazing image quality. Some of the improvements, though, are a new rear display, 43% larger display, in fact, going from a 3-inch to a 3.6-inch screen. Also, the electric viewfinder is 55% more pixels, so you're getting a really high resolution when you're looking through that eyepiece. Performance all around has been sped up and touched up into the graphical user interface, including startup time reduced by 46%, which is very big. It's something that I like. Another thing, and again, I touched on it before, but the software. I'm usually a tactile person, or I like the buttons and the controls and the camera. But with this camera, I tend to go for the software because it works so eloquently.
Gotcha. I have a great question from Gary Byron. Is it the same sensor in the Fuji medium formats? Yeah, it is. So we're pretty transparent in that we use a Sony sensor, the 33 by 44 mil 50 megapixel that's found in actually a number of medium format cameras. But it's just one component of the relationship in building a camera. So even though we're all starting at the same sensor, the color science and the design of our raw file format that goes into the entire experience of producing an image makes it significantly different. So if you put a Hasselblad 3FR raw file next to a Fuji RAW, next to any other camera that's still using the 50 megapixel sensor, they all start to diverge really quickly. And then when you factor in aspects like the leaf shutter, like the design and grip of the camera, we're still producing really different cameras. And to me, it's an immensely different experience, even if we're sharing a single shared component, basically. Cool. Monty has a question about why we require 3FR to FFF for file or to do editing, basically. It relates to how we do raw compression at the root level. So a 3FR is a file that you're shooting to the SD card, and we put it basically in a wrapper with as much data as possible. And then in order to, especially in focus, do as much manipulation and editing to the file as possible, we uncompress it. So then when you process Hasselblad files in focus, they become FFFs. So it's kind of just a way of working in a priority or a mixed priorities of size compression and flexibility in post-production. We've got someone who needs to bring their camera in for service in New Jersey. Definitely appreciate you keeping things up to spec. Right now, our facility in New Jersey is under temporary closure. If you go to www.hasselblad.com/US, so Uncle Sam, we're actually updating it day by day. At the moment, we've not yet started accepting packages because the facility is closed, but if it does change, and when it does change, we'll update it there, and then you'll be able to submit a service request or drop it off with your friends at Camera West, and they'll take care of it for you. Cool. Seeing a lot of solid feature requests. So live view and focus mobile 2, custom white balance picker. Can assure you that we are working on a number of the features that aren't quite there yet. And anyone who's familiar with the X1D version 1 will speak to our history of updating cameras well after their release. So from the original X1D, you can count on 2 hands the number of firmware updates and features that we added to it. And we carry the same forward philosophy in terms of if we can bring forward a feature that doesn't sacrifice the stability or performance of the camera, we believe in rolling it out to the customers. So some aspects like focus bracketing is a great example. Towards the end of last year, we released it as a feature for the original X1D. And a lot of people look at us and say, you're putting new features out for a 2-year-old camera. That's kind of crazy, but we believe in that. And with that, we're working on it for X1D2 as well. We want to bring forward features when they're ready and when they're stable. So you can definitely look for that in the future. I have a great question about adapting lenses. Ryan, what are your options when it comes to adapting other Hasselblad lenses to the X system?
Yeah, so if you have V system lenses, there's an XV adapter. And if you have H system lenses, there's an XH adapter.
Cool.
So you can just throw those right on the X1D2.
Yeah. So with the XH adapter, it's actually pretty neat because there's an electronic connection between the lens and camera. You're able to still retain the leaf shutter, which means that depending on the age of the lens, it'll sync all the way up to 2,000th of a second. If it's an older lens, 800th of a second. With the V system lenses, and this goes for our X-Pan adapter as well, those use the electronic shutter, which is a scan shutter of the sensor. So it turns on and off the sensor one line at a time. So it moves kind of top to bottom. So it's important to remember that when you're using the adapted lenses, I think it's really great. I, being a bit of a hoarder of camera stuff, have a ton of V-system lenses, but there's a limitation in the electronic shutter. So typically working outdoors or continuous light source, ideally in a tripod, but you have access to all of the lenses there, which is pretty stunning. A lot of questions about the CFE2. Ryan, where and when?
Yeah, so standard version is not yet available. However, we are hoping to have some more info in the next couple of months on pricing, pre-orders, and delivery for later in the year. So please check back with us and as well as Camera West for the latest.
Definitely. Great question. It sounds like we've got someone who's a legacy H system user. When you go from H to X, is there any quality or sacrifice in the image quality? Ryan,
Oh, so we're putting the question to you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat the question, Dan?
Yeah, definitely. So between the H system and the X system, are you sacrificing quality in any way?
Not that I know of. The pictures that I'm shooting are great. They come out with Hasselblad color. I can't go into it much deeper than that. I wish I could, but no.
Yeah. So it's lesser about image quality in the sense that no, the short answer, you're not sacrificing image quality in any way. Both our H system and X system are built on the same structure of the 3FR raw file and HNCS and really stunning lenses. It comes down to a matter of usability or how you prefer to work with a camera. With the X system, it's as compact as medium format gets. It's a really, really well-designed system for travel and portability, where the H system is modular. It actually mimics a lot of the original beliefs of Victor Hasselblad in that modular camera system. So interchangeable backs, bodies, prisms, lenses. So it's really about a way of how you prefer to work with it. With the H system, you have 50, 100, and even 400 multi-shot resolution options, where with the X system, it's really prioritizing size and portability and usability overall. Cool. Carl's got a great question about changing the aspect ratio in the camera. So Ryan, tell me a little bit about the crop sensors or crop framing options that I have in X1D.
You know what? I actually don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head.
No worries. So X1D has a built-in number of framing aids. So what's really neat is that we've built in really almost every crop or aspect ratio that we can think of. So I'm not going to try and name them all, but the popular ones, they expand the 24:65, 1:1 if you're used to shooting medium format or 6:6 film, and then some common print ratios. So letter like 8.5:11 or 4:5 or A4 if you're working in the DIN formats. Now it's non-destructive though. So with X1D2, if you're shooting in RAW and open the files in focus, those crops translate. If you open the files in an Adobe product right now, the crop information doesn't translate. And then if you're shooting JPEG in camera, the crops don't apply. So we're looking for non-destructive, but we basically look at it as a framing aid. So if you were to imagine a viewfinder mask, for example, it's kind of that idea of being able to pre-visualize what the crop or what the aspect ratio looks like. And you can even go in and change the opacity. So if anyone out there is used to like cutting acetates for their own focusing screen, this is a digital version. You don't have to mess with an X-Acto blade. So it's a really great functionality, especially if you like shooting 1:1, for example. So it's a great question. Awesome. We'll Focus Mobile, get Xpan crop into it. We are working on translation of those crop solutions from camera to mobile. Already in the software itself, we're looking to add a couple to it. Don't have a definite timeline on that quite yet, but for sure we want to add Xpan. It's definitely well loved in terms of the functionality. Looks like we'll Focus Mobile to be transported to iPhone. So users who are familiar with our system know that the first generation X1D, H6D, and older H5D cameras have an iPhone compatible supplement. We are working on a solution that is compatible, basically Focus Mobile 2 for iPhone. Again, don't have a specific date, but definitely keep an eye out for it because we're really excited to bring that kind of level of portability and post-processing to an even smaller form factor. Cool. All right. Well, Benjamin, do you want to pick a couple of questions, wrap it up, or you tell us?
Thanks so much, Dan, for going through all of the background history of the X1D and telling us a little bit more about it and answering all these questions. I think you did an excellent job getting through everything. I know you mentioned a little bit about this early in your presentation, but we did have a question about 35 millimeter, like the whole debate between the 35 millimeter high megapixel sensors and like a Hasselblad medium format sensor that's 50 megapixels as well. We get this question a lot in our stores, and we have a pretty good answer for it, but I wanted to get your input as to maybe the differences between a high megapixel 35 millimeter sensor and the rendition of a 50 megapixel Hasselblad sensor, and what the differences might be there or applications.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the last few years of digital have been really exciting because there are full frame sensors achieving resolutions that we never thought would be possible, and that's pretty stunning. But it comes down to a matter of physics. It's really a larger sensor with high resolution, meaning that with X1D, for example, I'm looking at 50 megapixels on a 33 by 44 mil sensor versus a full frame camera with 50 megapixels. So we're carrying the same resolution, same 50 million pixels. One's got a larger area, one's got a smaller area, and it comes back down to the physics of the larger pixel. So while it is really neat that you can jam 50 million or even more pixels on a small sensor, you start running into some real challenges. So the first is noise performance at higher ISO. And because you have so many pixels packed into a smaller space, you're losing more and more area in the gutters, basically. So you're producing more noise, where with a larger pixel, it's able to receive more light and produce less noise. The other is the lens resolution. Now, lenses are getting better and better and better across all systems, but designing a high resolution lens that is able to resolve so fine of a pixel pitch on a small sensor is a huge challenge, and that cost is going to keep going up. We saw it years and years ago. I speak very well of the Hasselblad V system lenses, but a lot of them weren't designed to produce quality imagery at 40, 50, even 60, even 100 megapixels. And we recognize that there's a hard curve in terms of the quality of those optics. So for us, we've got a little bit easier because we're designing high quality lenses for 50 megapixels, but we're also thinking ahead. So the quality of the optics really is meant to be ahead of its game. But what we do in the current era in terms of already having that larger pixel, again, really, really helps. On the practical day-to-day stuff, again, larger sensor, larger field of view. So people talk about that medium format look. You don't get thinner depth of field with the larger sensor, but because of the wider field of view, you're taking a step closer to the subject. So the way that the focus or the depth of field falls off has a distinct look, and you just can't do that with a smaller sensor. So as much as I try to avoid the size matters argument, again, larger pixel, and it comes back down to that larger pixel and what you can really do with it.
Thanks for that explanation, Dan. That's something we see all the time. You pick up an X1D, you put it in someone's hands and tell them to go use it, and they compare that to their full frame 35 megapixel or 35 millimeter high megapixel sensor, and it's got an entirely different characteristic about it that ends up, it captivates you. It's an incredible it's an incredible
here. I believe they're speaking to the camera, not focus.
Is there any plans for video functionality in the X1D2?
Yeah, definitely. We've committed to it. On the X1D on my desk here, there's an engraved video icon, and there's no unengraving, so we are working on it. The first generation X1D had a kind of basic set of features when it comes to video. And like with everything we're doing, we're looking to elevate that experience even further. So it is something that we plan to bring forward in a future firmware update.
That's awesome to hear. That'll be really exciting when that comes out.
Definitely.
Is there a good way for fast continuous shooting on the X1D2? Like, let's say if you're using the 135 plus the 1.7, you wanted to shoot wildlife or sports type photography and get that medium format look. Is there a good way to set the camera up easily to accomplish that?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. The first is just the high frame rate or the continuous burst. So X1D2 averages anywhere between 2.5 and 2.7 frames per second, which is actually a nice step up from the first version. And that already automatically or correctly puts you into a burst mode. The second is what we call MQ mode. Basically, it cuts off live view, which means that between every single exposure, time that would be typically lost between reopening the lens and starting live view back up is then closed. So you do have to pre-compose the shot, basically frame for success or pre-focus, and then enter MQ mode, and then it gets you a lot closer to the 3 frames per second that we expect. So 2 methodologies. The first is the continuous drive automatically in any of the modes, and then second is MQ mode, which is it's actually really cool because it's like a mode that's been designed for shoot from the hip, because you're not necessarily composing, you're able to get a faster refresh. Important to this is a really high quality SD card. So the X1D2 supports UHS-2 cards, so the fastest SanDisk or ProGrade cards out there, and it's a dual card slot, so you can write to one and then the other, or write to them in tandem.
Yeah, I've had an X1 or a UHS-1 version card in my X1D2, and the performance difference between a UHS-1 card and with a UHS-2 card is night and day. So if you don't have one of those, you're trying to photograph quickly, use continuous shooting at all, it's a must-have with the X1D2. So highly recommend going that route as well. I haven't had the chance to play with the H adapter a whole lot on my X1D2. I haven't had a reason to because the lenses on the X system are so great, but is there full capability like autofocus and aperture and all that with the H series lenses at the moment with that adapter?
Yes and no. So because the H system has been around for 19 years now, there's some kind of variations in generations. So safely speaking, the current generation of H system lenses, which have an orange square, those will behave exactly as you would expect on an H camera. So you get autofocus, you get aperture control and the leaf shutter. With all of the H lenses, you get aperture control and leaf shutter. Now with the older ones, you will be limited to manual focus. That's just by nature of the components inside the lens. But with X1D2 and X1D, you still have some really great focus assist functions. So in the viewfinder, in live view, you get focus peaking, your choice of colors, and image magnification, which you can either do as a very intuitive double tap on the rear screen, or you can assign it to a shortcut button. So for example, on this camera here, what I would typically use for the front depth of field, or the front button that does depth of field, when I'm shooting with an H lens that's a little bit older and doesn't have autofocus, or just out of preference, because I don't trust my eyes all the time, I'll remap it to a punch in, and you can do 50 or 100% and do critical focusing. Now, what's really cool is that if you're shooting with the camera up to your eye, you can do that punch in and then use the rear LCD as a trackpad, basically. So you'll be able to navigate around that image magnification area without taking your eye away. So it comes back to that designed experience and usability, whether you're working on the rear touchscreen like you would as a phone, or you have your eye up to the viewfinder. It's really meant to be super intuitive and working through both options.
Awesome. I didn't know you could use the screen as a little trackpad to move around like that. I'll have to go try that.
Definitely.
Pretty cool. Do you know what the average battery life is on the X1D2 right now?
It varies, honestly. We have a lot of people who are rear touchscreen all the time, and you'll get anywhere between 150 to 200 shots. If you opt to disable live view in the rear touchscreen or rear screen and use the EVF only, you'll get a lot more out of that. Now, what's really interesting with X1D2 specifically is that we opened up the USB Type-C port on the side here. So if you're working in a scenario that actually suits itself to having a battery bank or long exposure, for example, is a great place. You can actually do partial power over the Type-C port. So we have a couple of photographers who specialize in long exposure, and they're doing 60-minute exposures. And with any other camera, well, I mean, being out in the field for 4 hours is one thing of your own decision, but being able to power the camera partially from battery bank really extends the battery life of a single battery. So we built ourselves to kind of this open platform in terms of either partial power or data connection from the camera. And then on its own, anywhere between 100 to 250 shots is typical for an X1D battery.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had to use the external power bank on the XD2 once or twice now. It's convenient to have that USB-C. You can just plug it right in and keep shooting.
Definitely.
I think that pretty much wraps it up. We did have one remaining question, but I think it's an easy answer. Herb would like to know if he can clean his sensor on his X1D2 himself. Probably not a good idea. I would say if you have any questions about or you need the sensor on your camera cleaned, we do that in store at Camera West. I know the New Jersey facility is closed, but if you want to reach out to me directly, I can possibly facilitate getting your sensor cleaned properly, but I would not do it yourself. I think that pretty much answers all the questions, though. Thank you, Hasselblad. Thank you, Dan, Ryan, Gina, and Emmy for all coming out virtually to this live webinar. It's been great having you all. Dan's presentation, thank you, Dan, for that very informative presentation. I learned a few things. I hope you did as well. We will post this recording on our blog for you to go back and reference it if you'd like, along with any other resources that went along with this presentation. If you have any questions about Hasselblad products, please reach out to us. We'd love to help you out in any way we can. We are here at our Rancho Mirage store for regular business hours, Monday through Friday. Of course, our doors aren't open, but you can give us a call at 760-992-5422, or just shoot me an email, ben@camerawest.com. Happy to help you in any way we can. We do have a few more webinars coming up this month. We invite you to check out our events page on our website and sign up for those. Join us again, and we hope to virtually interact with you that way. Other than that, thank you all for coming out.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.